Welcome, everyone. Welcome back. It's been quite interesting last days here at COP26. You know, some disappointments, some inspiration happening, and I think we'll give you some final words tomorrow. For now, we're just so happy that you're here with us. And we're also delighted that John Liu is here with us. And I want to basically just go straight there because John has some super interesting aspects of solutions, healing, restoration to share with us. So really warm welcome to you, John. John Liu. Firstly, maybe also, I'm Kasia Joubert. For those of you who don't know me yet, I think most probably do by now. And I work for the Pocket Project, which is dedicated to the restoration of fragmentation in this world and the healing of individual, ancestral, and collective trauma. John Liu is a filmmaker, ecologist, and founder of Ecosystem Restoration Camps, which is a grassroots movement to regenerate degraded lands worldwide. A grassroots movement to regenerate degraded lands worldwide. Doesn't that just sound fantastic? Exactly what we need. And John made documentaries. He made some that are specifically well known, like The Green Gold, which is a Prix Italia award winner and Hope in a Changing Climate, named the best ecosystem film at the International Wildlife Film Festival. Yeah, and just to put John's rich life a bit into perspective, you know, I'd love to start, John, by asking you a little bit about your life, because we do know that you've been a professional witness also, because you've been a journalist most of your life and student of transformational change in politics, economics, culture, ecology. And we'd love to just hear briefly about some of the big shifts that you've personally witnessed in your life.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the great work you've been doing. We've known each other for a few years since we met in Scotland long ago, some time ago. Anyway, yes, I was young once, not anymore, but I was 26 years old when I went first to the People's Republic of China. I'd already been around the world, but I couldn't go to China then because it was closed when I was younger. But when I was 26, I went to China, and I had the opportunity to open the CBS News Bureau at the time of normalization of relations between China and the United States. So I covered the rise of China from poverty and isolation throughout the 1980s. And that included the Tiananmen tragedy and then the early parts of the collapse of the Soviet Union. So I was sent to Moscow a number of times as well. And then, so these geopolitical events, I'd been observing them, and then I was asked by the World Bank in the early 1990s to begin to film the baseline study for the rehabilitation of China's Loess Plateau in the upper and middle reaches of the Yellow River. This is the cradle of Chinese civilization, and it was quite, well, an enormous task and an enormous project. So all of those things, China transforming itself into a superpower, the Soviet Union collapsing, and the Loess Plateau being restored from basically a desert into a functional ecosystem was quite extraordinary for me. And when I compared the importance of the ecological systems to the geopolitical events I had been covering, my determination was that the ecology was more important, and that people were focused on some things which were not very, were more like hubris or an illusion, like Maya. And it was quite amazing to start to consider the fact that, well, we can restore ecology. But anyway, when I was young, I went out there and took a look at this. And when I looked at this and I saw all this destruction, it made me consider a lot of things. Exactly what are we looking at? I mean, what are we seeing when we see this? And I pretty quickly realized that we were looking at degraded landscapes. So I made a study over several decades now of degraded landscapes, and I found that historically, any culture that lost their biodiversity, their biomass, and their accumulated organic matter went the same way. And then I followed the restoration of the List Plateau for, well, now almost 30 years. And the people there, that's the way they greeted me whenever I showed up, by the way. It's wonderful when all these people come out and dance for you. That's a joke. But there were tremendous numbers of people. Everybody was involved because all of the people were involved in types of behavior that actually were degrading the landscape. So in order for them to restore the landscape, they had to stop doing what they were doing, and they had to do something completely different. So this was transformational change. And I began to realize that I've been observing transformational change in China, in the collapse of the Soviet Union, and here in the List Plateau, and lately in restoration projects in Africa, South America, Middle East, North Africa, and all over the world. So this is what it looked like. This is what the people were doing. It's quite simple. This is a windborne sedimentary soil. They're just making it flat so that they don't lose all the soil to erosion, and so that they can infiltrate and retain moisture and have a permanent vegetative cover. And interestingly, they released quite a lot of land to nature. So if they could not make the land flat, they had to let it go and turn it into natural zones. So what's interesting about this is this also defeats some myths. It shows us that actually they reduced the area in cultivation, but they increased the productivity. So this is very important when we start to think about restoring the earth and we start to think about transforming industrial agriculture to something more survivable and sustainable. Anyway, this is what they did. This was in 1994, the first time I went out to see this, and the next shot is in 2009. So by 2009, I think it's about 15 years, they were able to transform the landscape and make the landscape productive, and also to make it accumulative. So the other thing that's so exciting about this is that by replacing the vegetation, they're lowering the surface temperature on the earth. And by doing that, they're holding moisture near the lower, closer to the earth, instead of driving moisture into the upper atmosphere. So this was critically important. And this was when I began to see that actually functional ecosystems are a choice. If we don't understand that you need biodiversity, biomass, and accumulated organic matter, and we believe that we can extract whatever we want from nature and it doesn't matter, then we end up with a dysfunctional state. And what I saw was that we just have these two states, only functional and dysfunctional. And so we're running around with all of our ideas, but it's really just more simple than that. It's either functional or it's dysfunctional. And I also noticed that at the time of settled agriculture, when the Chinese began to restore this area, they had a fully functional system. But by the time I got there to start documenting it, was virtually collapsed. And then they made an intervention. And that intervention, where they made this intervention, is the paradigm shift that determines whether we can live in Earth systems or not. So this to me was of vital importance, and I just wanted to focus on that instead of on the geopolitical events, because they didn't seem very important. I don't think, nobody comes and asks me about Brezhnev or Deng Xiaoping or Ronald Reagan, but everybody's interested in ecology.
Yeah, it's so amazing to see, John, and I think, many of us are involved in healing of human systems, human nervous systems. And I think for us, the one thing that I was thinking earlier in speaking to you is that actually the repair and the restoration of human nervous systems and our collective nervous system is so related to the repair and the restoration of the biosystems and the life systems of the planet. And that one, in a way, mirrors the other. But, you've said that the restoration of our Earth systems is the great work of our time. And learning from Loess Plateau, you've been bringing the restoration camps out into the world, and you were just sharing, this has been just in the past 5 years, but you were just sharing with me that by now we have more than 50 Earth restoration camps around the world. And I'd love to hear more about how that is happening, the work that is happening, where they are, and how you're helping to shift mindsets for humans. As you said, it's like a choice. Are we working with or against nature?
I guess I got very philosophical when I started to study this, because I had been looking more about history and economics. And when I saw this, I realized that I needed to go very deep. And I found that what I'm looking at are multi-dimensional symbiotic systems. I would go further to say we're not simply mirroring what's happening in biological systems. We're part of
excuse me, John, to interrupt you.
Yeah.
You want to be sharing screen at the moment?
Yes.
Because we're not seeing your video.
You're not.
So you need to,
You are not seeing the video.
you need to choose the video that you're sharing.
Not yet. Just
Oh, right. Then. Okay. All right. So can you see something now?
Yeah, it's
now
not
we
yet full screen.
It's not full screen?
It is actually. It just has a.
Okay. Well, all right. So I guess I became very philosophical. Thank you, Scott, for helping me there. And but what I found was that when human civilization began, we just didn't understand how the ecological systems function. And so we made some fundamental errors. And these fundamental errors are passed on to us through history and tradition. And we were socialized to believe in them. And I think it's also in the sacred texts, so it shouldn't be a surprise. But human beings have often thought that what human beings made was more valuable than natural systems. And this is simply wrong, because the natural systems that create and constantly filter and continuously renew the atmosphere, the hydrological cycle, the soil fertility, and the biodiversity are vastly more valuable than anything that human beings have ever made and everything that human beings will ever make. But we have made this fundamental error and said that, oh, when we cut something down and we fashion it into something and it becomes a thing that we can buy and sell, that somehow that's more valuable. But actually, that's in general destroying the natural ecological systems. And so understanding multidimensional symbiosis means that we have to realize that we're not simply human beings. We're actually filled with microbes and fungal systems that we're living in symbiosis with them. We're living in symbiosis with plant material that's breathing in carbon dioxide and exhaling oxygen. And we're eating food that's grown through the fertility of the soil and the diversity. And actually in the DNA, our DNA and everything else's DNA, we're representations of all life since the beginning of time. And all of the bodies of all of the lives of all life forms that have ever lived are accumulated on the top of the geologic materials. And it's this reality that life and death are part of the same cycle. And that within the thing that also captivated me was I realized that when I was covering the news and there were all these conflicts and opinions and anger and power plays and so on. And in nature, I saw something which was more beautiful. And this is what made me really want to go everywhere and study these things and learn about them, because it made me feel better. And I think that this is the thing that we have to realize, that we're in a period now where the science is telling us that we're reaching a point where we're massively altering the Earth systems. And we need these Earth systems. They're our life support systems. It's how we get the air we breathe and the water we drink and the food we eat. And it's also that we are part of this. And when you think about extinction, for instance, in an extinction event, the top of the food chain is the most at risk. Well, we should really be taking this into consideration because we're the top of the food chain. So if you see that we're causing extinctions, it's not that we might lose a toad or an owl or something. It's that we are massively threatened. And I began to realize that if you understand the principles that are in operation here, that you can align human behavior with these principles. And then you get the benefit, but the benefit's not just there for you, it's there because it's about symbiosis. It's about, so it's a question of our consciousness. If our consciousness is high enough to recognize and see what's actually happening there, then we can benefit enormously. But if we believe and we're selfish and greedy and we want to take something out of that, then we're actually going to destroy the things that we need for life. So valuing life more than things also changes a number of other things. What I started to realize was that there are principles of evolution, and those principles are kind of like truths. So in looking at functional ecosystems, I realized in functional ecosystems, there's always more. There's always more biodiversity, always more biomass, always more accumulated organic matter, always more oxygen, always more carbon sequestration, always more diversity, always more beauty. And that this is what we really need to understand. And if we understand that, then we have to go back to our theory of value. And we have to ask the question, if we're facing an existential threat from climate change, what's the value of the natural systems that naturally mitigate and adapt to climate change? Well, it's clearly more than anything that we've ever, we can even imagine. It's certainly more than container ships piled up with plastic lawn chairs or whatever it is out there in the oceans. That these systems, and so what I realized too was understanding this means a methodology where we can have full employment, where basically you don't need to buy anything or sell anything in order to do meaningful, valuable work. Because if we all do restoration of ecosystems, that's the most valuable thing that we could do, because we're facing an existential threat from climate change. So this is pretty interesting, because we have all these people who are facing quite dire consequences at the edge of degraded landscapes. And in many cases, it's not their fault, because they were abused by other cultures who decided that it's okay to kill them and enslave them and so on. And this is just left over from history. And there's no way to go back in time and make that not happen. But we can determine the future. So if we can transform the economy away from things to ecological restoration, we can have full employment. And this is where the ideas of the ecosystem restoration camps came in. So I did want to show you some things which are both extreme and simple. So actually, this is the Taklomakan Desert. It means you go in, but you don't come out. And even here, the Chinese have figured out how to put a shelter belt through the middle of this. And the temperature differentials underneath the shelter belt in comparison to on the sand are 45 degrees centigrade difference. Now that means that human beings can, by changing the vegetation, lower surface temperatures, which alter the physics on the planet. They're also able to keep moisture in close to the ground, which is a complete change. So this is extremely complex, and I would not necessarily recommend going into the middle of the second largest shifting sand desert in the world and decide to vegetate it. But the fact that you can do this is of critical importance. So when we are able to do this, it means we can work in North Africa, we can work in the Middle East, we can work in the Mediterranean. And this is kind of what we need to do. Now, this is another thing. This is a very simple technique. This is just putting straw into the ground. And when you put straw into the ground, any moisture is going to follow the straw down, and it's going to start to deteriorate. And then birds are going to fly up, and seeds are going to blow up and come against us. And so without even planting anything, you can start the process which is necessary to restore even like dunes. So the fact that this is possible and that this is doable by just people means that we could employ vast numbers of people in this work. So right now we have refugees, we have homeless people, we have so many people who have nothing to do. And I doubt if many of them are going to become astrophysicists or, I don't know, nuclear scientists or something right away, but they can definitely grow soils. And they can definitely make simple interventions to bring back the moisture. And when they do that, they're doing something which is the best thing that they can do for themselves, their families, their communities, their countries, but also the best thing that you can do for humanity and for future generations of life. And so that needs to be celebrated. Their ability to participate and to have meaningful work and to do the most heroic work we need at this time needs to be honored, and they need to be paid. And so this is the interesting thing about the ecosystem restoration. We could move away from having endless meetings and have local people create microclimates. And within their microclimates, when we link those microclimates to other microclimates, you have the macroclimate. And this answers our ecological problems, our economic problems, our employment problems, our social problems in many ways. And we can start to talk about justice. This is what justice is about, because these people have had their lives disrupted by invasion, by genocide, by slavery. And I think we can go to the next level of understanding and consciousness. And in doing that, I think we can have a different result. And so in our camps now, the camps are, what I think is interesting about the camps is that they're the lowest cost and the highest impact, because they're immediate impacts. You don't have to wait years. You can go and learn, but they're not permanent necessarily. They're there to teach so that you can learn these skills and then go somewhere else, go to back to your home, go to start a new eco-village. But the thing about these camps is that they're not so expensive and that they're growing really fast. And so now we're working in Syria, Somalia, and Egypt, and Jordan, and Guatemala, and Peru, and there'll be more. So this means that we can go rapidly. And if we do this on the planetary scale, we're going to have an enormous effect, because this can really hold the moisture in the lower hydrological cycle. It's not simply about carbon disequilibrium. It's more holistic. It's talking about the real problems of human impacts on the environment, rather than turning that into a abstraction. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm back, and I see Kosha is smiling. That's a good sign.
Of course I am, and I'm not the only one. You should go to gallery view. Yeah, so it reminds me just of the joy that I've experienced, that I've spoken about before, the joy of watching the transformation happen around eco-villages, where I remember a scientific research that was done in the eco-village of Zeg, close to Berlin. And, this is where lots of people live. And then the natural, so-called natural parts around it, which was forests and agricultural areas, biodiversity was measured there in the eco-village and in a normal neighborhood. And it was extraordinary just how much higher biodiversity was in the eco-village than in the natural systems around the eco-village, very insightful for me, and also thinking of an eco-village like Tamera. We had Sabine Lichtenfels here last Saturday, just where they restored the landscape by creating lakes and keeping the water in that way. And just having experienced what you're speaking about the local change of climate, that we can create microclimate. And it's like there's so much missing in the climate conversation, you know. We seem to have this incredible need to simplify things as if, you know, humans can't grasp complexity while, you know, we live in complexity. So I would love to just hear a little bit more about the microclimates that we could create and how this might be woven together into a new global climate.
Excellent. Let me just say something, because I think that everybody is dealing with climate, with carbon trading and carbon money and all of this stuff. And you know, I've been involved with restoration for the last 30 years. And what I noticed was that the early carbon traders that were rushing to do this, they didn't really know anything about ecology. They knew about money and flows of money. And so they're dealing with flows of money, and they want to control that money. And I think that the more I've studied, the more I've seen that, well, carbon disequilibrium in the atmosphere is a great indicator, but it's not the whole story. And so if we create a meme that makes people just think of human impact about the climate is emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, that's a mistake. And so we need to have a real consciousness, a real understanding of what's going on. And especially in communities all around the world where they're mystified, what's going on? Why is it turning into a desert? Well, they actually can find out, we have the power to lower the surface temperatures here by restoring the vegetation. And if we restore the vegetation, then wherever the canopy can reach, then that's where the solar radiation is interrupted. And below that, you have a different temperature and a different, you've altered the physics, because if you have the solar radiation directly hitting, you're increasing the evaporation rates. And there's another conflated measurement, which is evapotranspiration, which is the evaporation and respiration conflated into one measurement. Now, that's a very good measurement for functional ecosystems, but it's a terrible measurement for degraded ones. Because if I go to a degraded landscape, I want to know exactly what the evaporation rates are. Because we're raising the evaporation rates by hundreds and thousands of percent by changing these temperatures. And so if you have these temperature differentials and create the thermic drafts, which are pushing moisture into the upper atmosphere, you will not reach critical mass for condensation and precipitation. If you don't reach critical mass for condensation and precipitation, it's not going to rain. And, you know, I think we're starting to understand how this works.
Just wait, John. Can you just say that again for those of us, you know, just that about the precipitation and condensation and how that leads to rain or not rain?
All right.
I'd just like it to really land for us.
Okay, I'll try. First of all, multi-dimensional symbiosis. You need to consider that for a while. Probably might not land all in one go. But so if you have the solar radiation directly hitting the surface of the Earth, then the temperatures will be elevated. As I showed you in the desert there, it was 45 degrees centigrade. That's enormous. That would be I think the high in Fahrenheit would be 170 degrees Fahrenheit. And then it would be like 75 degrees. No, yeah, something like that, 170 to 75. But anyway, it would go from very high, but maybe that was, now don't mix me up with centigrade and Fahrenheit, please. But in my academia page, there is an essay which I wrote in Cosmos magazine, which is called The Great Green Wall of China. Go there, find the Great Green Wall of China in academia.edu, John D. Liu, you'll find it. Anyway, so when the moisture is driven into the upper atmosphere, it leaves the lower atmosphere. Now, over evolutionary time, the whole point of the cell division and diversification and canopies and all that was to hold the moisture close to the earth. But if we take away those canopies, either by devegetating, deforestation, plowing, lots of other things, or even urbanization, industrialization, what we do is we allow the solar radiation to directly hit the surface. If that happens, the moisture is pushed into the upper atmosphere. There is a point which is critical mass. And that critical mass, now there's some still study going on about this, but let's say in the Mediterranean, where it's been studied pretty intensely, there were quite a lot of measurements of the percentages of moisture to air that was required and what other requirements were required to have critical mass for condensation, cloud formation, and for precipitation, the creation of droplets and raindrops. So somewhere in the area of 21 to 22 grams of moisture to a kilogram of air, and nucleation. So you have to have nucleation in order to have cloud formation and droplets. And what is it that create the nuclei? Exudates that are in breathing by plants, generally bacteria. So if you want to have cloud formation and you want to have raindrops, you have to have these conditions emerge. If you don't get to critical mass, let's just say coming off the Mediterranean Ocean, you have moisture coming in as it always has for millions of years. But instead of being able to, unable to hold the moisture, the temperatures are elevated and you've got thermic drafts which are pushing it up into the upper atmosphere. It's not going to rain there. It's going to go somewhere. We have seen in recent times what they're calling now atmospheric rivers, really huge amounts of moisture traveling around the world. And also on my academia page, if you're interested in this, I learned something in Mali, in North and Western Africa about this. And it was shocking to me because it was so beautiful and so amazing, but also in the CIA fact book, in the United Nations development indicators, all of these kind of data points, it said the people in Mali are the poorest people on the earth. But if I go there and I find the most amazing hydrological system that is regulating the Earth's climate, how could they be, you know, the only way they could be poor is if we thought that the only way that they could be rich is if they buy and sell stuff. So we don't value the ecological function that is there. And so it's a wasteland to us. But it's not a wasteland, it's an amazing place. And if you really go there and start to study it, you find some of the oldest libraries in the world. You find great musicians in the middle of nowhere. It's wonderful. So, you I think it's critically important that we get this right, and that we understand that ecological function is more valuable than things. And if we understand that fundamental fact, that ecological function is more valuable than things, then our economy is not about buying and selling stuff. Our economy is about protecting the earth systems. And that's what the indigenous people all around the world have done forever. So I think this is so important to understand. And thank you for listening to me. I get a little, I rant a little bit.
No, that was amazing, and just this, as you say, it's like the irony of the simplification, the reduction of climate change to carbon, which also, in a way, it puts it somewhere out there with the industry, and, it makes it about technology when actually it's about our connection to the earth, to the earth's living systems that can change everything. And, I know that you've been, and just here, if you look at the chat, it's just amazing how much people are hungry for this information.
Yeah.
And I know, I've been at previous COPs with you, I've seen you walk around with your presentation, in a way, we from the Global Eco-Village Network and many others have been bringing similar information in, and I'm thinking of Vandana Shiva around small scale farmers, it's all the same information saying, this is what we're needing, just as to add one thing, another fact that really amazed me was when I was in Zambia, where all the wells are drying up. And actually, they're still receiving, at that point, they were still receiving the same amount of rainfall as before. It wasn't that there was less rainfall. We think it's because there's less rainfall, but it was because they'd cut down the trees, there were more streets, and all the water from the rainfalls was running straight into the Zambezi. We all know the rivers of the world have gone brown. The best topsoil is swept out to the ocean. So just a whole other, as you said, the complexity of the water systems, that isn't working anymore. So many ways in which we, as human beings, even though we're so, we've done so much scientific research and we don't seem to understand our place in the hoop of life, as Pat McCabe spoke about it. So my question here is, as you've been bringing this out, yes, you now have 50 ecosystem restoration camp. How come, or let's ask it differently, how have you been received in the world? What is the support you're getting now? And also, similar organizations worldwide. And what is in the way? What is in the way for this information to flood the earth?
Well, yeah, I can't really, I've had films on all kinds of networks, and so I've gotten awards, I've given hundreds of speeches. I've been asked to speak at the Royal Society and the Royal Academy and so on and so on. So I can't really say that nobody's really listening. It's just that we have to think about collective intelligence. The thing that we're really in this period of study for me, I dropped out of college to be a cameraman. I should just tell you that I wanted to take pictures. I didn't like going to college. I thought the professors were kind of stupid. And so, one of them told me I would never work in journalism. So as soon as he said that, I thought, well, okay, then I don't need to be here. I might as well leave. And so I left and I went and worked in journalism at the highest level. So, I find that just kind of ridiculous. But what I think the problem is that even when I was doing all this study and I started thinking, well, what am I doing all this study about? because it doesn't matter what I know. It only matters what humanity understands. So I stopped really thinking about it like a study and started thinking about it like, well, let's do collaborative inquiry for collective intelligence. So who wants to study with me? So anybody who wants to study with me, let's work together, and then we're going to need some facilities. Well, we're going to need living laboratories in 6 continents. How about 7? But we have those now. So now they're living laboratories in every continent. There's a chance to work with hydrology, with soil, with vegetation. We can create botanical sanctuaries where we just gather the most endangered species and take them to the camps and propagate and plant them out. And just by doing that, those places become the most valuable places in their region because they're saving the most endangered species. But everyone has a role to play. We can all do this. And in doing this, we can have fun. We can have festivals. We can have music. I want to go grab my guitar and bring it over here. And, but let's just, we can have fun. And in doing this, the latest thing I've been thinking about, because I got trapped in California for a while. I'm now in the Netherlands, but because of the COVID, I was trapped in California, and I was shocked by the number of people who were sleeping on the street. In 2020, 1,200 people died on the street. 800 in Los Angeles County and 400 more in Orange County. 1,200 people in 1 year. And I've been to Dhaka, Calcutta, Nairobi, Sao Paulo, all these places. I've never seen anything as grotesque as this. So even though people are driving around in Lamborghinis, purple Lamborghinis and things, so many people are dying. And what's happening there? Wildfires, multi-year drought, wildfires, and this same social devastation. And well, I would say peak greed. So that's actually where I experienced this idea of peak greed. And I was like, oh, this is horrible. So that made me go to a camp on Mount Shasta, highly recommended. I stayed in a tent for 5 months. And I'm 68 years old, and I highly recommend it to anybody. Everybody should go. Stay in tents, in camps. I met bears and mountain lions and eagles and hawks and hummingbirds. It was wonderful. So, those are the opportunities to really feel the nuances in temperature changes, to understand how the moisture works, to see the moisture roll in, and to understand it's got to be captured, it's got to be kept here, otherwise it will leave. And when it leaves, it will come down somewhere else. But do they need it? They're probably experiencing vast amount, they're having floods, and other places need the moisture. So all of the life forms in evolution co-evolved to keep the moisture close to the land and moderate the temperatures. That's why human beings are, the top of the food chain, not because of anything we did, but because of millions of years of coevolution by a lot of other life forms, which made it possible for more complex animals to live on the planet. Kosha, you're going to get me to tell stories soon if you're not careful.
Well, that's what we want. Yeah, I'm especially happy about your confirmation also that we carry all other forms of life in our very DNA. It feels very intimate. And yeah.
Well, it can't be any other way. The fact is we're related to everything that's ever lived, because all of this differentiation and speciation has led to all life.
Yeah. Yeah, but just the intimacy of interbeing, you know, that interbeing is not some kind of imagination, that it's like right here, right now. It's real, you know, on so many different levels. And that we're walking on all the bodies of those that died before, you know, it's also very touching. So, John, absolute joy having you here with us. Absolute joy having your voice and your inspiration, and also these precious films, you know, the images that you brought into the space. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
We love you. Yeah, that's part of it.
Thanks,
So,
everyone.
yeah, thank you very much.